Chapter 15. I remember the next week as being both blank and confused, if anything can be both of those at once. It was blank because Nathan and Paige were gone. Paige had run straight to her car that night, probably as angry as she was frightened, and I didn't have the heart, or the guts, to call her afterward. But I missed Nathan even more. When I'd come back to the parsonage that night, Brother and Mrs. Whitley were waiting up. I gave them an edited version, saying that Nate was having problems with his voice, that the A&R guy hadn't been impressed, and that I'd brought the station wagon home, but Nathan was staying with Egan for a while to write some songs for him. Mrs. Whitley's face sort of crumpled when she heard that. Brother Whitley's face looked like it wanted to crumple, but he held it firmly in line and said, "Well, if that's what he's decided to do, then fine." When his wife started to say something, he overrode her with, "He's 20 years old, Elaine, not 15. Let him go." Without another word, Mrs. Whitley turned and went to their bedroom. Brother Whitley nodded good night at me and followed her. I wouldn't have been in his shoes right then for anything in the world. Artis's door was shut when I went upstairs, but I could hear her favorite Mexican guitar record playing, and that was all the comfort I had as I lay in bed and tried to figure out, once again, what was happening. Now Nathan thought I was the bad guy, the evil one. That was such an incredible thing to me, except when I remembered how he'd seen me all over Paige, and how that must have made him feel. As the hours crawled by that night, I started to wonder if he was right. Maybe I was the evil influence. After all, this had started the day after I got here. Maybe I had somehow brought poison into Nathan's life without even realizing it. Maybe I was some sort of carrier. Finally, I slept heavily, waking up mid-morning after the family had already gone to church. I wished they had called me to go with them. I felt as if I needed all the support and human contact I could glean to get me through the next anxious days. Sometimes that next week I was frantic with worry about what was happening to Nathan at River House. But I was tired, too, and got angry just as often. "Let him go to the devil, then," I would tell myself as I scrubbed the church bathrooms or vacuumed the sanctuary. "You did all you could. Like his dad said, let him go." But other times I felt the weight of unfinished stuff between us, like what had happened with Paige. I wondered if I should go on back to California. No point in staying if Nathan didn't want me there. When I mentioned that to Brother Whitley, though, he said, "We'd like you to stay, Tim. From a practical viewpoint, the church needs a custodian for the rest of the summer. But Elaine and I enjoy having you here. No reason for you to leave unless you really want to." That sounded as if I were a comfort to have around, which made me feel better. At least Nathan's family didn't see me as an evil influence. I never knew if Brother Whitley, at this point, really thought Egan was evil. I wasn't prepared to talk to him about it, because even if he believed me, there wasn't anything he could do. He and Mrs. Whitley would just have been more upset than they already were. And part of me still believed everything would come out all right, that Nathan would get through this. He'd come to his senses and go back to college in the fall, and things would be normal again. But the blankness of those days, working at the church without Nathan, my thoughts dashing back and forth, and my guilty fear that I'd somehow brought this on Nate, nearly drove me crazy. One day, probably Thursday, I was at the end of my rope. Mrs. Whitley had taken to crying in her room. Brother Whitley got grimmer every day, and Nathan had not called or come home once. Mrs. Whitley could find no phone number listed for River House or Egan Coutts. I remembered how Paige couldn't find his number either the time her car wouldn't start. Then she and Artis had wanted to go out to River House and talk to him, but Brother Whitley put his foot down and said absolutely not. We were going to let Nathan lie in the bed he had made and get on with our lives. So Artis spent as much time with her friends as she could, and I spent as much time at the church as I could. The place had never looked better. On this day I was tired. I'd gotten everything done and some extra polishing besides, and I still didn't want to go back to the house. So I sat in the sanctuary and looked at the late afternoon sun lighting up the window of Jesus with the Lamb in his arms. I shut my eyes against the tears I felt coming, swallowed the thickening in my throat, and felt myself praying. I never wanted to hurt him. I never wanted to lead him into this. Was it really me all the time, like he said? Something outside me, nothing I'd imagined or looked for, came into my brain and glowed for an instant like a diamond, like a single compassionate shake of someone's head. No. The soft feeling I'd felt on that first Sunday drifted over me. A couple of tears relieved the pressure behind my eyes, and I was able to take a deep breath. That night I slept without dreaming. Now I felt that I was good, or at least on the side of good, and I could stand up to Egan again. So the next morning after Brother Whitley was gone, I told Mrs. Whitley and Artis that I was going to River House to see Nathan. Artis begged to go too, but Mrs. Whitley wouldn't let her. "You heard what your daddy said." "But Tim's going." "That's Tim's business. He's not part of the family. He's a friend going to see a friend. Whereas if you and I go, it's babying him. It'll just make things worse." Mrs. Whitley's face looked harder and firmer than it ever had, but I could tell she was convinced that what she said was right. She and Brother Whitley knew they couldn't push Nathan to do anything. They knew his silent, stubborn streak as well as I did. He just dug in deeper. So she and Artis put together a massive lunch for me to take to Nathan. Artis made thick sandwiches, and Mrs. Whitley deviled some eggs, appropriate, I thought grimly, and packed them in a shoebox with some fruit and cookies Artis had made the day before. I didn't argue a bit. I'd been worried about him eating, too. I didn't think Egan had been grilling steaks for him, the way he'd done at those backyard picnics. Those days were over. Of course, surely Egan wasn't starving him to death. But I knew what happened to Nate's appetite when he was working hard, and I didn't think Egan would be particularly concerned about that. Whether or not Nathan would even touch the shoebox lunch if he still thought I was the devil, though, was another question. River House was in its usual middle-of-the-day deserted state, baking in the sun. I hadn't noticed its white paint peeling before, or the front steps sagging. One almost gave way as I went up them and crossed the porch to open the front door. I don't know what I'd have done if it had been locked, broken in maybe, but it wasn't. Through the darkness and dinginess of the main room, I could see tables and chairs still scattered, as if people had just left. I had reached the bar when a figure appeared in the doorway from the back hall. I had expected Egan, but it was Nathan. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a flat, quiet voice. He scared me more than Egan would have. In the dim light, his face was an oval blur, with dark smudges for eyes. His head was bent as he looked at me, and his hair fell forward, shadowing his face even more. He braced one hand on either side of the door jamb, and his sleeves fell away from his wrists, which looked thin enough to snap. "Your mom and Artis sent lunch," I said, holding out the shoebox. "I wanted to see you, talk to you." "I don't have time." At least he wasn't screaming at me to go away. "Well, you have to eat, don't you? Can't work if you don't eat." Then Egan appeared behind him. Nathan stepped through the door to let him come on through, and Egan gave me a cold stare. In spite of the shadowy room, I could see the features of his face clearly, as if they were lighted by some unnatural glow inside him. "Nate's working," he said. "I brought lunch from his mother." "Leave it. He can eat it later." "You're not trying to cut him off from human contact, are you?" I inquired. "Not let him see people? Keep him locked away?" Egan hesitated. "There are laws against that," I went on, "and the sheriff's a member of Brother Whitley's congregation. If I mention this, they'll be out here with a warrant before you know what hit you." Egan stared at me for another couple of seconds, and I got a feeling I'd had before, that he wanted to get to me, but couldn't. Nathan stared at the floor. Finally Egan said, "All right, go on. Go outside on the porch. Half an hour, tops." "Thanks so much," I said sarcastically. Nathan headed mutely toward the front door. Egan watched us both until we got outside, and I closed the door behind us. The way Nathan looked around as the fresh air and sunshine hit him made me think he hadn't been outside all week. His eyes were squinched up and his skin looked gray. He went to the front steps and sat halfway down them in full sunlight. I sat on the top step in the shade from the porch roof and opened the shoebox. When I passed him a sandwich on a paper napkin, I had to reach out and lay it on the step beside him because he had his eyes shut and his face turned up to the sun. His expression had softened, but the lines were still there on either side of his mouth. Even in the sunlight, I noticed, his hair looked dull. "Hey," I said, and he turned his head and looked back at me, or tried to. It wasn't just the sun being in his eyes. He was actually peering at me, frowning from beneath his brows in a paranoid way, as if he were having trouble seeing me and didn't want me seeing him. "So how's it going?" I asked. "Eat your sandwich." "Fine," he said, and picked up the sandwich and looked at it. "Artis made those, and I'm not going back and telling her you wouldn't eat it. She'll cry." Nathan sighed, took a bite, and chewed listlessly. He didn't look as if he'd been eating much at all, and I remembered that when people stop eating, pretty soon they don't even want to anymore. "What's he feeding you?" I snapped. He shot me a squint-eyed glare. "We eat, okay? Quit fussing." I shut up, and we both ate, although I didn't feel any hungrier than he seemed to be. I had the feeling of trying to keep life in him, one bite at a time. But if anything was putting life back into him, it was the sun. He seemed to crave it, lifting his face to it even as he ate. "Your folks really miss you," I said finally. This got no response. At last I figured I'd better say what I'd really come to say before he finished his sandwich and went back inside. "Nathan, I fucked up the other night. I had no business laying a hand on Paige, and I won't anymore. But that doesn't mean I'm pitted against you, okay? I'm not an evil guy out to get you. I'm caught up in this as much as you are." That was as far as I dared to go. He stopped eating and eyed me again with that paranoid squint. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I said. He shrugged faintly. "All right," he said, and went back to his sandwich. I figured that was all the absolution I was going to get. He probably believed me. He might even have considered it during the week and decided he'd been wrong to accuse me. But I also had the awful feeling he didn't much care anymore. Then he said, "Have you seen Paige?" My hopes rose. "Not since we left here Saturday night. You want me to tell her anything?" "No," he said, and tossed the last bit of the sandwich over the stair railing into the gravel parking lot. Tell me about what you're doing now," I said, desperate to keep him talking to me instead of going back inside with Egan. To my surprise, he sat up a little and said, "Egan's asked me to write an album's worth of songs for a guy he knows." "Cool. How's that going?" "All right." He stared at a spot on the step beside him. "I mean, it's kind of slow, actually. It feels harder than I would have thought." He didn't want to tell me all that, I didn't think, but his compulsive honesty came through in spite of how much he'd changed. "Where do you write?" I asked. I knew how he needed to be alone when he composed, and I couldn't believe he could get anything done with Egan standing over him. He shrugged. "Just around. Upstairs. I've been out in the backyard a time or two, but I don't get much done out there." "What's your day like?" I asked curiously. "You and Egan just hang out in the studio the whole time?" "No," he said defensively. "He does stuff down in the bar or goes and does errands or something, and I work while he's gone. And then he comes back and hears what I've done, and we talk about it, and I lay down a track." He shrugged again. "And at night he's busy in the bar, and I stay upstairs and work some more." "Don't you ever go out?" "Well, of course I do," he said with dignity. "I go outside in the back, like I told you." "Where do you sleep?" "The couch upstairs pulls out." It gave me the creeps to think about sleeping anywhere near Egan. "Nate, he hasn't tried anything with you, has he? Anything sexual?" "What?" "Well, I used to think he wanted to." Nathan looked at me with what was almost normal, healthy exasperation. "Well, even if he wanted to, I wouldn't. Are you crazy?" Remembering how Egan had turned into Paige that time with me, I didn't think it was crazy, but I was glad to hear he wasn't pulling stuff like that on Nate. "It just seems like he wants something from you," I said carefully, "and he keeps wanting more of it." Nathan's face clouded over again with what I was starting to identify as despair. He looked down at his hands. "I've let him down," he said simply. "I couldn't deliver when he needed me to Saturday night, and now I have to make up for it." You mean by writing these songs? I just want it to get back to the way it used to be, the way it started out this summer. I felt equal to things then. I felt on a par with Egan and with everybody. And now I've fallen or something. I'm way down below everybody else, and I don't know how to get back. His voice was low and thick with shame. You think God feels that way about you? I asked boldly. Nathan closed his eyes and turned his face away from me. God, he said, and laughed kind of hopelessly. He gives me all this stuff, all this good stuff, music and you and Paige and Egan, and I screw it all up. How do you think he feels about me? It didn't occur to me to say anything like, he loves you, or pray with him like a religious person would have done. But I did know that this was a dangerous frame of mind for him to be in, and that he didn't need to be in it all alone at River House with the devil, or whatever Egan was, feeding off him. Nathan, I tried to sound casual, then come on, get in the car with me. Let's go driving somewhere, okay? Then we'll go home where your folks are waiting for you, and Paige will come over, and... You don't get it, do you? Nathan's face had closed back up, grim and tight, and he was frowning half-blind at me again. You haven't been listening. Yes, I have. I owe him, okay? I'm not walking away from this without somehow making restitution. I wasn't sure if he was talking about God or Egan, and at this point he may not have known the difference between them. But all of a sudden I'd had it. My head started to ache as if I'd banged it one too many times against the brick wall of Nathan's stubbornness. Fine, I said, and closed up the shoebox with the food still in it. I stood up angrily, and so did he, glowering at me. I handed him the box. Here, take this. Eat it later. Your mom and your sister packed it for you with all the love they could send, and you're not even grateful. You don't give a shit. You'd rather stay here and break yourself for the riverman and let him eat you alive. Fine. Don't you talk that way about him. You walk right back in there then, Nathan, but you remember this. It's your choice. You're choosing. Nobody's making you. You're damn right it's my choice, he told me, crossing the porch. And you can't keep me away either, I called after him. I'll be back to have lunch with you again, and you just better talk to me. You better not shut me out. The front door slamming behind him was my only answer. But at least he'd taken the shoebox with him instead of throwing it at me. It was the only victory I could claim that day. The shoebox was not only food, it was goodness, sent back into River House with Nathan like a talisman to guard him, I could only hope, until next time.